the universe speaking to you. You are now tuned into the Modern Spiritual Life Coaching Podcast by the certified master life coach and spiritual guide, Coach Chip. Welcome, souls. We now begin this episode of a transformational journey. Unedited, unscripted, and creating something from nothingness. Now, let there be light on Modern Spiritual Life Coaching.
The Modern Spiritual Podcast with another episode, 173, The Greatest Discovery You Can Make. The greatest discovery of this generation is that you can alter your life by altering your attitude of mind. Ernest Holmes, founder of Science of Mind, made a similar statement. The greatest discovery ever made is the discovery of the creative power of thought. Recorded at the Austin Center for Spiritual Living. Presents a talk given by Reverend Richard Imprescia. Stay tuned right here on the Modern Spiritual Podcast that has a spiritual purpose with integrity.
Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to see all of you here. They're back a little over 100 years ago. It was a man named William James, often referred to as the father of American psychology. He made a comment that's a well-known comment that you probably heard. It said, the greatest discovery of my time is that you can alter your life by altering your attitude of mind. It's really kind of a blockbuster idea, even though it's thousands and thousands of years old. The basic idea, it's been said before, been said in a lot of different contexts at a lot of different times. But he brought it out at a particular time when people were hungry for recognizing, being able to identify that something special within them, and that thing special was their ability to be able to shift their consciousness. Ernest Holmes, our founder, a few years later, made a similar comment. He made it a much more definite way, and what I mean by that is he placed it, it's what the general semanticists would say as an allness statement. He said, the greatest discovery ever made is the discovery of the power of thought. Now, I don't know that that's the greatest discovery ever made because I don't know what all the discoveries are that have ever been made. But he certainly brings together or is compatible with that idea. Our thoughts, our attitudes can alter the way we are going to experience life. And yet, interestingly enough, that's not, I think, the greatest discovery that can be made. I personally feel that there's an even greater discovery, and that is a discovery that digs down deep within us and is the recognition or the realization that is awaiting each one of us, the full realization that we are already in the midst of everything there could possibly be, and that we have access to it. And I'm talking about the discovery of our oneness. Again, an idea that has been around forever, it seems like, and not a really very popular idea. There's a lot of resistance to this idea, and yet we see it continuing to emerge in various ways, and sometimes in rather amusing ways. I remember a number of years ago, I was at a meeting, I think it was a Chamber of Commerce meeting. You know how everybody's rushing around giving out their cards and trying to find what everybody else has done and what I can do for you and what I can get from you and that sort of thing. Chamber of Commerce, wonderful context, actually. The fellow came up to me and he says, and what do you do? And I introduced myself and I said, well, I'm a minister. He said, oh, a minister of a church? I said, well, yeah, that's the First Church of Religious Science over on San Pedro Avenue. This is in Albuquerque. And he looks at me and gets this peculiar look on his face and he says, oh, yeah, I've heard about you folks. That's where everybody there believes they're God. And I looked at him and I says, yeah, but it's even more than that. We even believe you're God. And that kind of threw him back. But the point of that is, yes, God in me, as me, is me. But God in you, as you, is you. Because there is a oneness. There is a wholeness to it all, and we are all part of that one thing. We see this idea emerging all the time. I love to tell the story, and it's of an event that took place many years ago, but I remember it. Some of you may or may not remember, some 30 years ago, there was a Super Bowl game between the Denver Broncos and the San Francisco 49ers. John Elway was the quarterback for the Bronx, and no. I can't even think of his name. The great quarterback for San Francisco 49ers. Anyway, and this is particularly close to me because I was on the telephone with my friend from Denver, and he was rooting for the Denver Broncos, and I was rooting for San Francisco. And San Francisco won, by the way. And you know, at the beginning of the game, how they have these little film clips, and they're interviewing players or coaches or whatever. And one of the reporters was interviewing George Seifert, who was the coach of the San Francisco 49ers. And he says, "And what do you do before the game when you get your team together and chat about things? How do you pep them up?" And he says, "Oh, we don't do a whole lot, but we talk an awful lot about oneness." And I heard that, and it just blew me away. Now, I don't know what he meant by oneness, but I do know it's getting into our language, the idea of interconnectedness, of the oneness of all things, of how we do come together, that we're not individuals out there to try to make the big strike necessarily, but more and more we're beginning to identify with the sameness of each other, or I should say, respect, acknowledge our uniqueness within this field of sameness, and that's the field of Godness. It's a wonderful time that we are in. A few years back, Buckminster Fuller, some of you know Buckminster Fuller, who is a great American mystic, architect, engineer, political scientist, a little bit of everything that he did. He's a very influential man, unusual, a real genius. He went through early in his life a period of silence. And it was during that period that he completely transformed his ways of looking at things. And when he emerged from that, after about a year of silence, he no longer referred to God. Instead, he replaced the word God in his languaging, in his lexicon, I guess you would call it, with the word universe. And he didn't talk about the universe. He talked about universe. Just like you wouldn't talk about the God, he would talk about God. And I wondered, what is it about this word universe that he uses over and over? And you begin to get an inkling of this when you look up the structure of the word. Uni and verse. Uni means one, implies wholeness. Verse means song. One song. He's talking about the one song. That's how he sees the universe, the scheme of things. And we have another word that's sort of like that. It's symphony. Sim meaning together, or similar to, or very much like. It really means sort of together. And phony, which means sound. So what we're come out of this with is the idea of one voice, one tone. And that every voice, every one of us is part of this universal symphony of life. And it cannot possibly be complete without every voice. And this is an abstract concept now, when you think about it. But if you think of the universe as being unlimited, that is infinite in its extent, and there are scientists today that are arguing the point of, is the universe really infinite? That's another subject. But when we think of this limitlessness, then if that which is infinite can be added to, it's not infinite to start with, is it? Or if you can take something away from it, it couldn't have been infinite to begin with. So it's beyond actual limit. The universe, without our voice, without our tone, without our part of the song, cannot exist. Do you see? Begin to get, even though it's purely intellectual at this point, but at some level begin to get the importance that you represent within the overall scheme of things. It's just really kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. And the more awake that we are, the more of this harmony and aliveness and activity of life we can sense, because we begin to feel and know something, even if we don't know what the word know means at this point, of our part within it. It's kind of like, you remember the 100th monkey phenomenon? Ken Kai's a new age type, new thought thinker who's gone now, but years ago wrote a wonderful book called Handbook to Higher Consciousness. And he also wrote another little book entitled The 100th Monkey, and he talked about a phenomenon, related it to some other things. The phenomenon was one that was observed by behavioral scientists of monkeys that were on a particular island, and these behavioral scientists watched them, and their staple was a sweet potato that grew on this island. And at first they would dig up the sweet potato and they would eat the sweet potato. They'd brush it off, and after a while they got more adept at cleaning it up before eating it. And then something sparked in the mind of one of them, and they started going down to the sea and washing them off. And wow, they watched an actual evolutionary educational process taking place there among these monkeys. The really interesting thing about this is, on a separate island, completely disconnected from that first one, monkeys over there of the same species that lived off of the same sweet potato spontaneously began to wash their sweet potatoes. Wow. The suggestion here, of course, that comes out of this is that they call it a morphogenic field. There is some kind of a field of connection between them. There's some kind of a communication that takes place that speaks again to this idea of interconnectedness. And the 100th monkey idea was that there's a certain number, then he called it the 100th. When the 100th monkey, or when you reach that particular point where you have enough of the monkeys that recognize something, whammo, it takes place throughout the consciousness. And this is the idea that was behind John Randolph Price's World Hour of Peace that I talked about a little bit last week. Get enough people together to create that critical mass where there begins to be a momentum created that gathers in and brings together more and more people with a force that cannot be stopped as a result of that resonance, that identification. Just as the monkeys on the other island seemed to sense, seemed to know, and they fell right into line with doing what was going to serve them. And I believe that we have things like that, something like that going on in the earth today. It is a cosmic process within which we live, folks, within which we move, within which we have our whole being. It's a process in which there is a constant aligning with, coming into harmony with the natural order of things, which is always toward expressing God, universe, expressing according to its design, its purposes, and it's going to be fulfilled. You can fight it, but you're going to go along with it ultimately. Or you can learn to cooperate with it and experience the benefits of being in alignment with life. It will be fulfilled. It's just like the little analogy that I often use. It's like the river of life. We can jump into the river of life and we can have a ball. But we know one thing, the river is always going to be going in one particular direction. It's going to be seeking that particular state, its natural process. Now, we can fight it by trying to swim upstream. We can fight it by going cross-stream. We can fight it by doing stupid things and drowning. Or we can get in and we can frolic and have a lot of fun and paddle our canoes and stop along the way. But we're always going to move in a particular direction. And that's what's happening. They're not evil forces in the universe that are going to change things and make us be a particular way ultimately and destroy us so that we go to hell. No, but we may experience hell, and it's what we're going to experience right now when we try to row our boat counter current for long periods of time. That's the hell we create for ourselves, the upset that we generate for ourselves and within ourselves. Because we are one with it, we can impede our process within it, or we can accelerate our process depending on our alignment with it. And this is what we're about. This is all that I ever do here. This is the only thing that I'm really concerned with in doing the kind of work that I do. This is what really gets me off, folks. And that is to stand before you and say, you are magnificent. You know, all of the wonderful things that can happen in a group like this, they're great. But there are consequences of the teaching. Or at least my approach is such that I want to give you, and I hesitate to use the word truth, because I really don't know what the truth is. We can only begin to demonstrate how certain things work in life, and after a while we come to the conclusion there may be truth and knowledge in that, only to find out that we've been wrong. But find out what works so that you can experience more of who you are. Then the potlucks in the community and all of this happens because we come together in like mind. And that's when we begin to experience the personal kind of interactive love that every one of us yearns for. But there's a deeper love. And that's the love of universe pouring itself into the whole of creation, providing us with every opportunity that we could possibly think of, ever desire, ever want, in order to be able to experience fully who we are. Gee, I mean, I even impress myself sometimes with some of these ideas, and also at the same time yearn that they can be true. And yet, it's an inner process. It is an inner process for every one of us. And it's not a very popular way of approaching things. I mean, we really do like to maintain our differences among people. And because it's not popular, people that have come along and propounded such ideas like Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, they've been assassinated. John F. Kennedy was assassinated. He was a great visionary in these particular kinds of things. John Lennon, you know, some of his songs, if you listen to them very carefully, is speaking of this idea of the interconnectedness. I am in you and you are in me, and we are one together. You remember that in one of his songs, one of the verses? So people are resisting this, and there are a lot of reasons that they resist, and that's why you, in an effort to be one of the 100th monkey, must raise your consciousness and see yourself as having risen and still rising, to quote the song that we heard earlier today. And it's an ongoing process. You know, people resist because they have been taught that there are certain labels that you have to put on things, and this label is good and this label is not so good, and those labels are according to whatever the functions are, and either we agree with one function and not another one, but they tend to separate, they tend to isolate us. Instead of us appreciating our differences, we tend to use them to create adversarial orientation toward each other. Then this happens. The second thing, or another one of the things that creates resistance, is that I'm talking about very abstract concepts here. The senses just don't get around them very easily. And then on top of it, resistance is often an indication of the inability to take full responsibility for action, for what we do. I mean, it gives us the opportunity to blame somebody else for something that we may have initiated in our life, as the result of which is to create even greater separation and kind of take the monkey off our back, so to speak. Not the same as the 100th monkey. And then, of course, there are personal agendas, greed and power. Usually personal agendas grow out of greed and power of some sort. Each one of us is different from that. Each person has within him or herself everything that's necessary to be able to awaken to the truth of who they are. And we don't have to be that way. And those that I say that function out of that, I'm talking about you and me, because I have done every one of these things. I have brought into my life, had these kinds of resistances in virtually every area of my life at some time or another. When I talk to you on Sunday mornings up here, I'm really talking to me. It's my process that I'm going through. But one of the things that I do know is you are not that much different from me. You are just as wonderful. And sometimes just as messed up. So we have to keep supporting each other and loving each other and outpouring ourselves into each other's experience and allowing the growth to take place, recognizing that we have risen and we are still rising up. I have some things to suggest for you today. Real simple. I don't have any deep, profound processes or gurus to refer you to, or secret mantras that are going to transform your life, or some ritual that is going to lift you up and open you to new things. No, these are relatively simple, straightforward things. Like, for instance, take some time every day just to imagine that you are connected to everyone that you meet. Think about that. 5 minutes. You know what I used to do? I did an awful lot of traveling, and I'd be various places in the world. And you spend a lot of time in airports. And I remember one time in particular that I'll mention that I was in Frankfurt, Germany. My plane got in at like 7 o'clock in the morning, and it wasn't until 5 o'clock that afternoon that it was taking off going to India. So I had from 7 to 5 o'clock. I took a tour around Frankfurt. That was nice, but I still spent a lot of time just sitting. And so I sat there, and as people walked by, I'd look at them and I'd say, the God in me salutes the God in you. Or some such thing. I recognize the presence of the infinite. Everywhere I look, I see the face of God. My love extends, flows, surrounds you. This is an amazing thing to do. Does it do any good? I don't know. It made me think it was doing some good for me. And maybe that's reason enough. But I think in that acknowledgement, it's like sending out a little mental, spiritual radio signal that adds or resonates with the intrinsic harmony and balance within the whole system. And as that resonance takes place, there is an amplification. And at some point, like in the 100th monkey phenomenon that we speak of, I think we can amplify to that point where it spreads and spreads rapidly. But it starts with you. Another thing you can do is look at the labels. How do you refer to yourself? How do you label other people? Are the labels complimentary that you place on somebody else? Oh, golly. I'm really fortunate because I have a wife who calls me on this stuff all the time. And, you know, it would never lead to blows, but it certainly gets aggravating when she lets me know where I'm getting off track. But I forgive her for that. But really, we do some nutty things, don't we, in the way we begin to regard other people. I think another important thing that we can do is to realize that this process never ends. You may have arisen, but you're continually rising up beyond, expressing more. There's never any end to the universe, to the one song. It is without limit. So how can we ever fully embody it? There's always more. And it wouldn't be much fun, would it? To know where you hid the treasure? The fun is in the adventure, in moving toward it and discovering it. The last thing I think that is so important is to recognize that everyone has a contribution to make in this life. And sometimes in looking at what it is people are doing, we see differences and we get this idea that my way is better than their way and don't see that there is a contribution that can be made. And there's a little statement that I just love that somebody used on me years ago and I've never forgotten, and it was, Richard, you being right does not necessarily make me wrong. A very powerful idea. Doing these things, to me, I think, is probably one of the quickest ways for moving into our enlightenment and our fulfillment. Let's come together now, become quiet, and have a little bit of a healing. Healing comes from an Anglo-Saxon word, halik, which means to make whole. So when we speak of healing, or as I speak of healing, I'm speaking of making whole the complete being. Whatever may be out of balance, it is that to which we address our attention right now. And we begin by reminding ourselves that there is one life, just one life. In the beginning was that one life, that word. And that life, that word, was with God, and the word was God. Life. And nothing was made except through the expression of that word. So, there is one life. That life is God. That life is perfect. That life is my life right now. Take that idea and hold it for a moment. The life of God is my life right now. All the love, all the joy, all the power, all the intelligence, all the creativity, all the harmony, all the balance, all of the abundance and substance in the universe. All of these things are but elements of that one life, that one thing. And that life is my life now. I exist in this field of unlimited goodness. Tell yourself that silently right now. I exist in this field of unlimited goodness. And because I am one with it, God in me, as me, is me. I am not all of what God is, but all I am is God expressing as me. In the realization of this profound concept, almost beyond my limits of understanding, and yet I will accept it, I know that the harmonies of the universe are working in and through every aspect of my life right now, bringing about a balance and an orderliness to every facet of my experience. That my pathway is being illuminated, and I see with clarity my directions for my next steps along this path of unfoldment toward the fulfillment of myself according to the purposes for which I am in this life experience. As the doors open before me, I courageously step through, examine the possibilities and the opportunities, and know that I am inwardly guided to that which is most appropriate for the next part of my sojourn in life. And all the while, I am healed. I accept these words for myself. I accept these words as those for everyone here. I rejoice in the realization of their truth. I know that they are so. And together we declare, and so it is.
This has been a Master Certified Alchemy Coach Chip podcast episode. Until next week, be sure to subscribe to this podcast channel and to our social media sites to stay updated about the Modern Spiritual Podcast. This podcast is being rebroadcasted on modernspiritualradio.com. Thanks for listening.